Good evening. I think everybody knows who I am. I'm Lucinda with the Flood Control District. And as you probably can imagine, we've been working feverishly to get to the point we are now. We have the funding, so that's a really big deal. We were able, and I just heard literally late yesterday that OMB finally apportioned all the funds to NRCS. But we were able to do a creative workaround to get $9.5 million for Wupatki trails and Brandis. So that's really exciting. So we're rocking. Yesterday, we selected, most of you know the gentleman in the back here, Mike Garrison. We selected, Tiffany Construction. Took such good care of all of you last summer. We selected them as the contractor for the on-forest measures for the entire area, for all 9 watersheds. So that'll be going to the board for approval, consideration and approval on Friday. So we're excited about that, getting them going. And Mike is a master of that, all the work he does, but particular, they have tremendous ability to do that work and all the work that they do, frankly. So we're really excited about that. Tomorrow we will receive the proposals for the construction manager at risk for the actual work within Wupatki trails and Brandis. And then by the end of next week, we will have that contractor selected for who will actually construct the measures that you're going to hear about tonight within your community. So we've got a lot going on. It's moving fast and furiously. The gentleman up here, and is Mike with us tonight? He's on his way. Mike Carley, the other engineer with Natural Channel Design. They've been working nights, weekends to get the plans. They're now at 75%, and you're going to get to see those tonight. And I think importantly, what you're going to hear this evening is that we've identified some additional needs within Wupatki trails for what we're terming an overflow system on the west side of the development. And you're going to see, Chris will walk through that tonight. That's going to be important. Just in looking at the damage that's occurred since the flooding, the volume of water that we have coming through that area, frankly, the prospect that we could, frankly, have another fire above you. When we look at all the damage to the road, damage to private property, we look at the whole issue on that west side. We need to do an additional system within that area now. So you're going to get to see that. That's going to mean that from a handful of you on that west side, we are going to need easements, drainage easements, and we're going to need to do that very quickly. So Chris will be communicating, so it'll be very important, particularly those of you that are on the west side, that the west side of, over on the flank of Camino that makes the turn and then goes south, that those of you that are here, that you stay afterward. Of course, I'd like everybody to do this, but particularly those people stay afterward and see the plans so that Chris can talk through that. Chris and Rick are here. Rick Schroeds is here. Rick's over here. From Civil Tech can talk through with you, what's proposed and what we're probably going to need so that we can move that process very quickly. Obviously, with the snow, our construction season is very condensed. And what we're hearing, though, good news, is that Weather Service told me again today that we're looking at a drier than normal period coming. So that's good. But we still have a lot of moisture on the ground. We all know that, right? So, we're confident that we can, get as much as we can get done. And I'll tell you, there is no guarantee that we will get these measures done before monsoon. We are going to do everything possible to get them done. working very long hours and doing what we need to do, but there is no guarantee because I don't know when monsoon's going to start. I don't know how quickly it'll dry out. We will start from the south and construct northward so that we don't create any impacts in that process. So, that may well, we'll get as much as we can get done on forest, but there'll be elements of the forest work we can't do until the channel is constructed and the overflow is constructed. So anyway, it's going to be a super, super challenging spring for us and all of us. So, but no, we're going to do everything we can to mobilize as quickly as we can to get as much done as possible. So with that intro, I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chair and Supervisor Vasquez to do a welcome, and we'll go from there.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. It was really exciting. We didn't expect to be having this conversation this soon with the funding that we need to do these projects. As Lucinda said, there's no guarantee we'll get them done, but we're going to do the best that we can to get as much as done before monsoon season. So please be patient, bear with us. We're doing the best we can, but little by little we're proceeding. The area that we still need support in for funding, and this is where maybe you can advocate for your community, is the transportation piece, and that's through the Arizona Department of Transportation. We need highway drainage improvements. Right now we're fixing the on-forest measures, we're fixing the channels through the neighborhood, but the area where we still don't have funding where we need is for the highway drainage improvements. And where that becomes important is if we get all these other measures fixed and put into place, but we don't fix the highway drainage, we're just going to continue to close 89 in the monsoon season. So it's crucial. It's that third piece of the puzzle that we still don't have funding for, and that's where an email to the state can be really helpful. So please think about that and consider advocating for your community. We are and continue to do so, and we will continue to push to get the funding as soon as possible. And hopefully we can get as much done before this monsoon season and really reduce the risk for your houses this coming monsoon. So again, thank you very much. Before I go, I just want to acknowledge our chair, Patrice Horseman. She's been leading our county in this last year, and so we really appreciate her leadership and being here tonight. And we've been pushing. We've been meeting with our congressional delegates, with our senators. We've been going down to the state. We've been going in overdrive, and we're really fortunate because I wasn't here during Schultz, but from what I was told, it took 3 years to get where we're at now. So considering what the damage was done, considering what we've been through, this is lightning fast, and so it's really exciting. And I hope you enjoy watching what we plan to do for this project. So thank you very much for being here. Good night.
Thank you. Okay. Sit down. Where did I sit down? That's helpful. Yeah. Okay. I think we are I'm going to run through this really quickly, but some of you may not have been able to join us in August when we did our corridor meeting. And I just want to quickly touch on, and I touched on then, what we had done back in 2013 in terms of what was constructed. I think most of you are aware that at that time we constructed a channel through the east side of the development, and and we designed that to a 5-year post-wildfire, which was about around 130, 140 CFS. And now, of course, as you well know, we're seeing upwards of 11 times that flow. That's a photograph of the alluvial fan before the pipeline fire, which had performed very well up until then. And this is just a chart showing how much the volume of water has increased since the pipeline fire. You probably remember this. You can see Wupatki, Lennox. Lennox is your watershed, is how much that increased. This slide I updated from August. We did end up producing over 1 million sandbags, placing over 4 miles of concrete barrier. And we ultimately ended up spending $9 million last summer, both in short-term mitigation and response. Probably a pretty significant, I would say about half of that was in debris removal. We did, removing all the sediment and debris that had come into all the detention facilities and in the neighborhoods and on the roads, et cetera, onto the on-forest measures. And we did secure about $2 million from NRCS for the short-term mitigation measures, which covered, I think, about 2/3 of that or so, right, Sean? About 2/3. So a big expenditure, and the reality is that we expended all that, and the largest storm that affected any given area was a 10-year storm. The modeling is done on a 2-inch storm, which has not been atypical in our area. So, I keep telling people we could see worse flooding. That's the unfortunate thing. And what we've seen, in October, there's a system called LIDAR. It stands for what? Light emitting, where's Corey? Light emitting radar. It's some light, what is it? What's it stand for? Light emitting, what? Thank you. So basically they go up and they beam down, and it gets extremely accurate topography for us. And they actually use it to do a lot of engineering, particularly on forest. It's very accurate. They also take photographs, and we did that in October post the flooding. And particularly in your watershed, we've seen a lot of impact. And so Alan will talk more about that. But in all the watersheds, there was impact. No surprise, of course, but this is the funding, and we had described back in August what we had applied for. Again, for Wupatki Trails and Brandis, with the technical assistance dollars, we're getting up, actually, I think that's just construction, isn't it? I think it's a little bit more with the TA. So yeah. So anyway, we did a workaround with NRCS and got some upfront funding. I just got the notice that we are getting the remainder of the funding so I expect those agreements to come to the board here, hopefully within the next week to 2 weeks. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alan Hayden. Alan Hayden's with Natural Channel Design. I think all of you know Alan from over the years, and he will present what the plan is at this stage. We're at, what, 75% plans? Yeah, on forest. And there were, again, Mike just joined us. There's Mike in the back. Mike just joined us and working feverishly again to get these plans done so we can get into construction as soon as possible, physically possible. So thank you, Alan. You're going to need that. Right, but
thank you. So nice to see everybody again so soon. As usually it's a couple years between these meetings, but now things are moving fast. So we thought we'd start off. Most of you guys, I'm sure, have taken a walk and seen the condition of the watershed. Right now, it's really kind of beautiful up there, very deep, very white. Underneath lies all of this. So the flooding last summer kind of ripped the watershed apart. It dropped those channels. There's about 2.5 miles of channels that extend up towards the really steep part where we get into the Waterline Road and all that kind of stuff. But everything below there has incised down. In some cases, let's see if I can make this work. So this area right here, just for some perspective, that is 8 feet deep. The channel, when it started, was up here. So it's probably incised about 10 feet here. These are good 10 and 12 foot banks. And this was once an alluvial fan type situation across this big wide valley, and this has dropped down probably 10 or 15 feet. All of this sediment has come down, and Mr. Garrison has very kindly moved it for you several times during the course of the summer. So our, what we're looking at up in the watershed as we go through all of this is that as these channels deepen, the next step is they want to get wider. So, and it doesn't take a whole lot of more water to bring that sediment down, because these banks are just caving off, as you can see here, and supplying this sediment to the channel. And it doesn't take a whole lot of water, a big flood, to keep moving it down. So our on-forest program is really looking at not so much trying to stop the water, because that's really tough until we get trees and vegetation back up there, but we can work on trying to stop this sediment. And that sediment is what comes down, clogs the fans, clogs the ditches, clogs all the pipes under the driveways, and creates a nuisance for Chris's designs. So that's what we're after, is trying to get sediment that sediment supply and also the sediment transport to start reducing. This is kind of what it looked like. This is all that sediment that came down. You guys saw all of this. I mean, we saw aggradation up to 4 or 5 feet deep on the alluvial fan. So the alluvial fan system that was there, built after Schultz, did a great job, but it was well overmatched by the amount of sediment that's coming out now. It was not built for these kind of flows. So an overview, this is kind of what what the watershed restoration area will look like. Here are you guys, right down in here. We're going to be working on the alluvial fan here, widening it out. We'll be building out and strengthening the overflow fan here, and I'll go into that into some detail. But really importantly, all of this up through here, from here up to the 420 road, we're working on channel grade control and a low water crossing to keep the road from getting washed out every time. Up through here, we're looking at channel reconstruction, taking those big vertical banks, laying them back as far as we can, and then putting grade control in the bottom of that channel, okay? That we have over there, Mr. Garrison will enjoy this, there are probably over 50 large grade control projects in this section of channel, using really large boulders, okay? 48 inches, Mr. Garrison. And then this whole area right up here, this is that big incised alluvial fan. And so we're going to turn that back into an alluvial fan. It'll be over 120 feet wide. It's a little over 2,200 feet long. That's a significant change in that geomorphology. We're expecting that there's still a huge sediment supply coming off of here, but this is the first place where we can start to filter it out. We know that we will pick up additional sediment from the remaining banks and everything that we can get through here, and then that is what this fan is for down here, okay? So a little bit, here's a little dive in closer. These are what Mike and his team have been working on really hard for the last month or so, is how do we make all this work? Because quite frankly, this whole area right here would be an alluvial fan if nature had its way. And we're trying to maximize the use of this small space up here and whatever space we can eke out down here, and get this to accumulate whatever sediment we can get off of that hill here, rather than having it spread everywhere. So this fan the flows come into a large kind of spreading pit right here. That's our borrow area and where we can fill gullies and stuff. And the fan gets extended out quite a bit. So you guys that have been living up there for some time, the old fan was about this wide. We're just about going to be able to double the width of it. Okay, we've had to work with the Forest Service to get extra permission to get over here. Then we get into this transition channel, which everybody saw work, and it's a really important portion of what happens here. Because flows that drop out a large amount of sediment here, and then we've seen a lot of sediment drop out in here, and we've seen these this transition channel and terminal trench actually fill up in a few minutes during some of these flows. We've pretty much tripled the size of the existing, and due to an awful lot of midnight oil burning and a lot of modeling, we've also kind of created a system where it can help to clean itself at some point. So it actually will be sloped from high end to low end over here. At this end, right here, this will be where most of the water goes. And Chris will talk about this later, but the channel coming down on this side gets enlarged, and we can put about 1,800 CFS in that channel. We meter that out. It comes into this terminal trench here, and we have a weir across here that allows 1,800 CFS to come down this side and not overwhelm that channel. Because of the slope on this thing, we'll be able to store sediment, but because this end is higher than the outlet right here, we'll have a slight slope, and we can keep some sediment passing on if this thing starts to fill, because then it can continue to work through the whole course of the storm. When we get into flows that are in excess of 1,800 CFS, they will break out and come down this side over here. And you'll see we've kind of dropped this fan down just a little bit and extended the width and really put a whole lot of grade control into it so that it can accept much larger flows without degrading itself. It can filter out a bunch more sediment, and we know that some will make it past here. All that comes down, settles out, goes slower, goes not as fast as it has been, and then because it's going really wide, we collect it in a second terminal trench here at the bottom, right above the houses. And so this excess flow that beyond the 1,800 CFS that comes over to this side, goes into the terminal trench, we pass it into another transition channel and get it over here to where Chris and Civil Tech can handle it on this side. So the way that it works, we're reducing sediment supply up high, and we're reducing sediment transport up high. We know we're still going to have a lot more. So we've expanded this out as far, this is as big as we can make this space work. Okay, we can only build alluvial fans where we have the valley type to do it. And we lose that valley type here and right here. So we have to maximize our use of this area right here, upsize the transition channel. Through a bunch of engineering, we've got it so we're pretty sure it's going to self-clean at the final point, and we can meter it out so 1,800 CFS goes this way, whatever's left goes on this side right over here. And thanks to me for getting stuff and Mike running back to the office and getting stuff, we can show you this up close on a bigger map than a slide later. So thanks to him for putting in the extra miles tonight. So we fully expect that this area, it will likely require some maintenance going forward, okay? This is, the discharge, we've seen an 11-fold increase in discharge. Kind of a rule of thumb, you increase your discharge by double, you're going to increase your sediment supply by by 4. So the sediment supply stays ahead of that. And so as long as we have these higher flows, we can expect a lot more sediment to come out of the system. And we are doing our very best to stave it off solidify the banks wherever we can, make sure the grade doesn't drop out anymore, and we don't get 10-foot deep channels to becoming 20-foot deep channels, because it could still keep going. And we save all that sediment up there. We chop off the sediment transport wherever we can, but we really only have two opportunities: fan way up high and this fan down low. So we have to make the most of what we can right here. And we realize it's not very big compared to the job it has to do. So there'll probably be some ongoing future maintenance to keep that fan clean and working. So, okay. Some of the practices that you guys have seen, you've seen all these before. The grade control are these very large, heavy basalt boulders placed in these cross-vein weirs that hold the grade control and also keep the shear stress off the banks by keeping the shear out here in the middle. And this is what it looks like when it's in use, okay? And then for alluvial fans, all the grade control in there is either buried log sills or buried rock sills. Rock sills are really handy because they don't burn up the next time the fire comes along. So we're learning a few tricks along the way. Yeah, yeah. And so, and again, lots of, this is over on the museum fire side of things. This is recently hydroseeded, so of course we're going to be putting grass back on everything we can find. And this is kind of what the construction practices look like in general. It's very, very similar to what you guys have seen in the past occur in this watershed. It'll just be a lot more of it and a lot more extensive. So I'm going to pass it over to Chris.
I just want to add that adding this overflow, though, does not mean that it will be able to handle every flood event. We get a much larger flood event than the 2,000 CFS. We have a system, and Chris will talk more about what that capacity of the overflow will be, but we could get events that will exceed the combination of those two. So, we don't have enough money, time, and ability to mitigate as we did before. We can't mitigate every storm that could occur. So, but I think this is going to go a long way toward changing. If we had this system in place before last summer, you would have had a very different reality. So with that, turn it over to Chris Duza with Civil Tech.
All right. Well, thank you. It's good to see you all again when we're not out in a flood, right? Okay, a little recap from the Schultz fire back in 2012. I know Lucinda talked about it a little bit, but the entire watershed, the Lennox watershed, did not burn in its entirety back in Schultz. This time around with the pipeline fire, it did. So the entire watershed did reburn as a result of the pipeline fire, all the way up to the top of the watershed. The modeling that was done after Schultz was about 3 inches of rain, and it produced about 130 CFS up at the north end of the subdivision, where Alan talked about where that primary terminal trench was, up along the highway there. So about 130 CFS, and our current modeling right now that Corey's working on, J.E. Fuller, I think at that same point right now for 2 inches, we're pushing about 2,000 CFS, just over 2,000. So quite a big difference in discharge, which of course you guys saw that, this summer. So back in 2012, we looked at several different alignments, one being along the highway, which is actually where the improvements were constructed, and one along the interior of the subdivision. Ultimately, the alignment along the highway had the best cost-benefit ratio, which is a requirement from our federal funding partners. So that's the alignment that was chosen and constructed back after Schultz. And then, of course, as we're doing right now, there's some modeling that's done independently by Corey with J.E. Fuller called No Adverse Impacts Modeling that shows that by the improvements that we're putting in place that we're not creating any adverse impacts on people's properties. So some of the other improvements were improvements for the culvert crossings at Camino and on Lennox. Some 30-inch culverts were added there for the 130 CFS, which of course, those aren't going to be sufficient for what we're seeing right now. We never modified the roadway elevations. Those stayed the same. And in general, when we did the corridor meetings, I know a lot of you were here back then, but some of you weren't. There was a desire from the residents to have kind of a softer, more natural type of channel. Given the flow of 130 CFS, we were able to do that. So we built the TRM, which is a turf reinforcement mat channel through the neighborhood. So again, now moving to the pipeline fire in 2022, as I had mentioned before, the entire watershed now has been burned. So the portions that weren't burned in Schultz are now burned, and it's burned quite severely. So like we were talking, the 2-inch in 45 minutes, based on our most current modeling now is over 2,000 CFS. So the plan is to utilize the existing channel alignment and easement that we did in Schultz. We already have the environmental clearances that were done back in Schultz for that area. Because we're using federal dollars, we have to go through a NEPA process for environmental clearances. So we still have to work through that process with the state archaeologist, but it's a much faster process now because we cleared it during Schultz. So we're hoping to have that clearance, in place by the time we're ready for construction. Again, we have to look at a positive cost-benefit ratio and have those no adverse impacts as a result of what we're doing with our improvements. So when we met during the flooding, we had talked about, trying to utilize those existing easements and move as much water and sediment through the neighborhood as we possibly can. So what we can fit in there is going to be a 20-foot wide, 20-foot bottom width, 3-foot deep rectangular channel that we're still working through the design capacity on that channel, but we believe it's going to be in the neighborhood of about 1,300 to 1,500 CFS. So where we had put those 30-inch culverts at the road at Camino and at Lennox, we'll be taking those out and we'll be replacing those with box culverts. So it'll be a single box culvert which will match the configuration of the channel. So the box culvert will be 20 feet wide and at least 3 feet deep so that it won't create any obstruction for the water and the sediment as it's moving down through the channel and across the roadways. So as Alan mentioned, and I have 100% confidence in Alan's design that we will see no sediment coming out of the forest ever again. But just in case we do. So we want to have a channel in there that obviously can transport sediment and debris. So what that means is a channel that when it's flowing, it's going to move at a high velocity because it's the velocity that'll help us carry the sediment and debris and minimize the effects of the sediment and the maintenance of it. So with that comes, obviously a need for fencing and safety barrier along that channel. If you have a channel that's, 20 feet wide, 3 feet deep, and that water's moving through there 30, maybe 40 feet per second, when that thing's flowing, you certainly don't want people or animals anywhere near that channel. So that'll be part of the design to have fencing and safety barrier along there. We're not looking to modify the roadway elevations. Again, we're going to leave those where they're at. But a big constraint that we have going through the neighborhood is the Department of Defense fiber optic line that runs through there. We can't move that. We can't relocate that. We really can't touch that. And so it really kind of limits what we can do with the depth of the channel. So we have to kind of stay above that. So one of the things that Lucinda mentioned as well was the secondary overflow improvements on the west side, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you were here during the summer, you've seen this where we show the primary alignment that runs essentially, along the subdivision on the east side and along the highway. and then what we're calling the secondary overflow alignment. And so, as you're well aware of, as Alan mentioned in the summer, during those initial events where we got so much sediment that it really just filled up that alluvial fan above the neighborhood and the trench in a matter of minutes, and then water, really pushed down the west side, and we got quite a bit of flooding there along the west side. So, even though we're trying to minimize the amount of sediment that'll come to that primary alignment and keep it moving when it does come through that primary alignment, there's still a chance that we're going to see water coming down that west side. Even if, it exceeds our design flow, we'll see water on the west side, which is why we want to have that secondary overflow alignment. So a little bit, this kind of shows it in a little bit more detail with our construction plans. You can see where those sheet denotations are of where the primary and the secondary improvements will be. So a little bit about the shotcrete channel. Shotcrete is another term that we use for concrete, and it is a pneumatically placed concrete. The reason that we want to go to a concrete or a shotcrete channel as opposed to a concrete channel is to speed up the construction. We can build this channel a lot faster than a typical concrete channel, given our time constraints with the winter that we've been having, and not really sure. We're hoping to get to construction maybe by April, sometime in April. But this type of channel will allow us to move much faster, and especially if we can get several crews working on it. So again, it's a shotcrete channel. It's 20 feet wide, it's 3 feet deep with some safety fencing along the sides. So that's what we can fit in those existing easements. So a little bit, again, I mentioned the existing easements. I don't know if Greg Velasquez is here. I don't see him here tonight, but this is Greg's property. These dash lines represent those existing easements that we obtained during Schultz. And then you can see that concrete rectangular channel within that easement coming down to Camino, and the box culvert that will go there in Camino. Again, we're not going to be changing the road grades, but we're going to try to keep as much water as we can and sediment moving through that channel and moving underneath the road with no obstructions. So the secondary improvements, this is a little bit with the road cross section there. So the road through the neighborhood, you have 60 feet of right-of-way and then 2 8-foot public utility easements on the outside of those. There are utilities located on both sides of the road. There's a water line on one side of the road, and then the dry utilities, there's no gas, the electric, telephone, dry utilities are on the other side of the road. So what we want to do with the secondary improvements, so secondary overflow improvements, is again, to speed the construction, to minimize the cost, we're going to try to minimize the utilities that we have to relocate. So we're going to try to work outside of the existing road prism. The paved road is 24 feet wide, 2 12-foot lanes with a 3-foot shoulder on it. So we really have about 15 feet outside of that between the shoulder of the road and where the utilities are to put those improvements in. So what we're going to show you tonight, the plans that we have and what I'll show you tonight, for that secondary overflow improvement area was really the replacement of all the existing driveway culverts and the improvement of the roadside ditches to be 3 foot wide with 2 to 1 side slopes that would fit in there, with head walls on the upstream side of each one of those driveway culverts. We can't get a whole lot of capacity on that. We can get good capacity with the channel, but really the driveway culverts is what limits us. So we've kind of looked at option 2 and plan B, which is a more expensive option, which would be a storm drain, a 5-foot diameter storm drain that we would run down one side of the street that would actually be underneath that existing ditch there. And instead of having driveway culverts at each upstream end, we would just have a pickup that would go down into the storm drain. So we could get a much, much, much greater capacity in that storm drain system than we can with just driveway culverts. So we've been talking with the county about that. There's significantly more cost, and the district and the supervisors, everybody's agreed that we should move forward with that as opposed to the driveway ditches. So what I'm going to show you is a little bit outdated because we just kind of got to go on this. So, but I'm going to show you anyhow.
When we looked at the cost, what was really important to understand is that with the other system, we would have a lot, if we continue to have bigger events, we already are seeing a significant amount of damage being able, as you know, you're out there, to the road, and we would start losing a lot more of the road. The culverts are going to take a tremendous amount of, so when you look at the cost benefit over like a 10-year or more window, it's far better to go storm drain. And we did this in South Paintbrush, and it's been a lifesaver. It was his idea, and it was absolutely the right thing to do then, and it's the right thing to do now. Yeah, there's some more cost up front, but over that period, the cost is lower than going the other way. And in terms of how we fund it, we have a little more flexibility. We can actually justify a component of this cost through our public works budget versus having to use flood control, because this is really going to add a lot of value to protection of the road. So it's a balancing act here, but and it gives us a lot more capacity to be able to mitigate the impacts. So
Yeah, with the driveway culverts alternative, we were looking at, in this secondary overflow area, to be able to convey roughly around 40 CFS on both sides of the road, or 80 CFS combined. With the storm drain alternative, we may be able to push 350 CFS into that storm drain, and then another 40 CFS down the road, which is a significant benefit in case we do get flow, coming down that other side. So quite a bit more capacity. Darn it. So Allen's transition channel on this lower fan is going to come into the neighborhood down through here. These are where the lots start over on this side. So our storm drain pickup is actually going to be right here, come across, and then we're going to run the storm drain all the way down this side of the road, all the way out, all the way around the neighborhood, through your property, Chase. We will need an easement from you, not to put the pressure on you, but we need it from you either way, with the channel or. And that storm drain will empty out into the rectangular concrete channel downstream of the neighborhood, okay? We're planning it to go down this side here. It would be the east side of the road, the east and the north side of the road.
what's going to happen?
But it'll be within the right of way. So it'll be roughly sitting right in here, underground. So it'll be beneath the existing ditch, okay? So that's a little bit on the secondary overflow. Do you want to do next steps, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can do the next steps.
Oh, are there any questions, or are we waiting?
Yeah, well, let's finish up, and then we can take general questions, and as you can turn this off, right? Yeah, thanks. Again, I think what's going to be important, particularly for you those of you on the west side, is you look at the plans and see what the plans are. We will need some additional easement. The intention, right, Chris, is to go adjacent to, as everybody's aware, there's a Donny Park water easement between the lots and an access road there now that you're aware of.
On the other, the easement that we'll need on that adjoining property will just butt up to that Donny Park easement, because the water line does go through there, and that is the access road for them. So we'll be asking for another easement where that transition channel will come from the forest into the storm drain.
And the storm drain will be at the forest boundary or closer to the road? Do you know that yet?
It'll be closer.
Okay, okay. So we will need an easement. There are going to be some easements at, I'll say, at the top end of that system. A couple of easements, or at least one. And then we don't need any easements along the roadway. That will all stay in the easement. And then we will need an easement, as he mentioned, from Mr. Wilson down at the south end to get the water across and over to the channel. So important for those of you involved in that to see this and make sure you get your questions answered tonight, so that, you know, we can start moving ahead with that process. So other processes, we're at 75% plans, and Corey is getting all that data from the system, and he'll be running the no adverse impact analysis, Corey with Jay Fuller. And that will, you know, we honor that, right? It's important that when we run that analysis that we do see impacts, that we'll have to go back and modify the engineering. So it could be that some of that will influence the capacities that we're striving for tonight, that we have to reduce those capacities to be able to reduce the impact. So that's a very important step, as you remember from last time. And of course, finalize the engineering, that's obvious. Secure all the required approvals. I think right now, Alan, we're still hearing, we know we can probably get onto the forest, the lower areas, and start work there fairly soon. The upper area, we hope to have that by the end of the month. So between sometime the 15th and the 30th of April, have the NEPA for those on forest measures. And then as Chris mentioned, within the neighborhood, the improvements within the neighborhood, not the overflow, that's separate from the NRCS. But because that is, it was cleared in 2012 timeframe, but they have to update that and still go through the process of notifying the SHPO. And to his credit, the archaeologist with NRCS started that process way before we got the money. And he's been working through those steps and is following through that process. So I think we expect to have that approval about the same time. So, and then, you know, any of the ineligible costs and the cost of the overflow pan will go back to the board as well for approval. We've outlined most of those costs. This will be a component of what we already outlined in terms of the ineligible costs up front, the vast majority of that. And again, some of that cost will be, can be covered within Public Works as well as roadway. NRCS doesn't cover the roadway improvements. They never did, they never will. That's never ever happened. And that's just not an eligible element of the, you know, of their project. So the boxes, they don't cover those. So that's something we always expected anyway. And then select a contractor. As I mentioned, we're in that process now. We'll get the proposals tomorrow and then be marching through we're going to be doing interviews and making the selection hopefully a week from Friday is the goal. So, and of course we need to secure the easements. We need to do that fairly quickly, because we also have to secure what are called mortgage releases. You know, we all think we own our property. We don't. The mortgage company does. If you have a mortgage, if you don't, you do own it. But if you don't and you have a mortgage, then, and they are historically very slow to respond. And so we've used, last time I used the congressional office, Ann Kirkpatrick was phenomenal. And their office literally got on the phone with them and called them and said, this is a crisis, you need to get this done now. And so we will pull every one of those strings again if we need to. And we've got the support at the congressional level to do that. But we have to get the document, you have to sign before they'll even look at it. So it's really important that we move through that process really quickly. So a lot of challenges, as I mentioned before, very compressed time frame. A lot of different challenges to get this all done within the very abbreviated time frame that we're going to have this year. No guarantee we're going to get it all done. We'll start from the south, we'll work north and get as much of it as we can. The contractor will work into monsoon for as long as they can. At some point, they probably will have to stop, right? So, but the goal is to work as much as possible during that time frame. So weather, that's just a fact we can't control. We're not controlling it. We never will. And I think I walked through most of the rest of this. Another fact piece that Chris didn't mention that we will be doing is what we're now calling integrated mitigation areas. So some of those areas, primarily where the water comes off the forest and comes into the overflow system, and then down at Chase's end of the roadway there, we will be looking at potentially some additional on-site measures if you're interested in adding this. We did this again up in the paintbrush area along Paintbrush. Basically, it's some additional more permanent berming where we put in the concrete barriers and then cover it with dirt. It gets revegetated. You can vegetate it any way you want. If you want to plant bushes, people have done a really nice job. If you go down and look at Willa's place down on Paintbrush, she did a beautiful job re-landscaping, and a number of the properties did there. So we'll be looking at, when we run the analysis with the no adverse impact, and because we run the bigger storms during that process, we'll see which properties are still at risk in that overflow scenario, which still have significant risk, and we'll look at, can we look at some on-site measures. That's done through what's called a cooperator agreement, which basically says that we construct it and we turn it over to you. It'll be your responsibility to maintain it. And, but it's something we would do at our cost, and we're working with NRCS to integrate that into the system. We did that down on Paintbrush as well. So, and again, that's, you decide. If you don't want it and you're happy with what you have, that's your decision, right? That'll be that's what you get to decide, whether you want those additional measures. And we can't do it for everybody. We'll do it for those that are at the greatest risk in the overflow scenario. So I think with that, are there any general questions before we break and go look at the maps, and where you can ask more, like, if for my property, I want to know X, Y, Z. Yeah, Jim.
I think this is a question for Alan. It looks like this new design is gonna handle somewhere between 1,600 and 2,000 max flow. What did we see last year in terms of flow? Coming out of that fan up there.
Probably 1,000 in that neighborhood. The initial flow that I was there to see all of, the initial one in June, looked to me about
700 CFS, and I kind of went over that with Corey, and we compared notes. Chris and I've compared notes. We probably saw some bigger flows. I didn't see all of those all summer, but what I saw was in the neighborhood of 1,000 CFS. I don't think that you have yet seen the flows that we are designing for.
Okay, I think that's important for us to have a perspective.
Yeah, I think, but also keep in mind that, as Lucinda said, we're 2 inches in 45 minutes. That's a big rainstorm. It's not terribly uncommon, and having something bigger than that and creating more flow, that's not an impossible scenario.
No, not at all. That's a 25-year storm, the 2-inch. So it's I'll say a heck of a lot better than the 5-year, but it's, and if we can get there, again, we've still got some work to do on the engineering side, and we may or may not get there, but we're trying to get to that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Yes, sir.
I didn't see in the plans any movement of the terminal trench. Seems to me that, and I surely don't know, but the way the water comes down perpendicularly to that trench seems to be problematic. Is there any benefit, and why do we leave it in that orientation? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. The terminal trench, well, it goes across because it has to pick up all the flow. We can't let flow go around it. We have to condense it right there. It also has to be, we played around with putting an angle on it and starting it higher in the fan and running down. That gets to be problematic because the higher flows can actually tear the trench up. And so if we come in, use it as a stilling basin, and then we can feed it out either side in these side weirs, it works the best from all of our modeling and from all of what we have seen. All of these things are kind of based on stuff that we actually see happening. Terminal trench is kind of a extraordinary version of that. But it's from what we can get, having it go straight across the fan, catch all the flow perpendicular, and then slope it up, and then spread it out on one side or the other, keeps it off of the houses that are right in the center of the fan, in that middle of that geomorphic feature. What we realized that, the terminal trench that was there was way undersized for the flows that we saw and that we will be experiencing. So we've really increased the size of it. And then we also realized that because that flow comes in and it stills right there, that we get a pile of sediment building up there. And we've seen 3 or 4 feet of sediment build up over the top elevation of the terminal trench. And what we've been able to do, and this is an extraordinary amount of work on Mike's part and a little bit on mine, is that if we can, the bottom of those trenches and the way they operate is level. And if we change that so that when it starts to flow out the weir, we actually go from a 0% slope to a 1.5, almost 2% slope from the top across the weir. And this is, building the weir angles and the exits, that we can actually start to see enough velocity and enough shear stress along that slope to start moving sediment and move it into the channel. And so I recognize the problem and that you're talking about, but it's from all of our calculations and all of our design work and what we see happening, the best way to do it is to put this kind of slope on the exit of the trench, rather than try to run the trench at an angle across the fan. And the other thing that works into that piece of that puzzle is when we run, where that terminal trench goes is the end of the fan. And we can't go any further down the fan with the terminal trench, it has to feed into that channel where Chris is. And if we go up the valley, we're cutting almost a quarter of the acreage of the fan out. And that is a quarter of our sediment storage on an already really small fan compared to what we have to do. So I get it. We have spent all winter trying to deal with it. And I think we have the most workable situation.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to what Alan said. So it's interesting because, back in Schultz, thinking about the alluvial fan and the terminal trench, the purpose of the alluvial fan is to store sediment. So, and you saw how quickly, it filled in with sediment this past summer, and those terminal trenches were actually designed through time to fill in with sediment and disappear. So we've kind of changed strategy a little bit with the terminal trench, like Alan had mentioned, of putting a slope on it to try to keep some of that sediment moving, because the watershed is so damaged from the top to the bottom, and there's not a lot of room or a lot of natural land features in the watershed where we can create or restore those alluvial fans. As Alan mentioned, it's mostly in channel. And you're seeing just a tremendous amount of sediment, that's coming out of that channel and not a whole lot of room to store that sediment, which is why, we're going with, such a large channel, as big as we can make it, down through the neighborhood and trying to keep that water moving as quickly as we can get it to move through there to carry that sediment, because we know we're going to continue, it's very likely, in the immediate future until we get significant watershed healing there that, we may be seeing quite a bit of sediment coming with the water.
Other general questions before we break to look at the plans? Well, thanks for all hanging in there with us. It's been a fast and furious process here, and really appreciate everybody's cooperation. And I think, Chris, your plans are over here you've got 2 tables set up. You and Rick are going to staff.
Yeah, Rick and I will.
Going to staff 2 tables over here, and then Alan's plans are over here. So join the engineers and ask your questions. So thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. Keep an eye on your emails.